Alrighty. Hi, my name is Maddie. I'm the host of Respect My Region's Higher Women podcast, where we talk to influential women in music and cannabis. On today's show, we have the pleasure of speaking with Jocelyn Sheltraw, who's the Director of Industry Relations at Headset and on the Board of Directors at the CCIA. Hi, Jocelyn. How are you today?
Hi, Maddie. I'm good. I'm happy to be here talking with you.
I'm also happy to talk to you, and you said you're in a hotel room. Where are you at in the world right now?
I am. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. I, oh,
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, oh,
okay.
so why?
I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm here today for the Arizona Dispensary Association meeting, as well as there's a MITA event tonight. So I'm just hanging with the cannabis community here in Arizona, which is always fun to do because every cannabis community is so different. And so I love hanging out in Arizona.
What would you say is the difference? You're coming from Oakland, right? What would you say is the difference between the culture from Arizona to Oakland?
So I would say I'll compare it to California. Very different culture. So Arizona, the cannabis community is very tight knit here. It's a much smaller community. There's only 140-ish retailers. I think they just are issuing another 26 retail licenses. And the market here is vertically integrated. And so when you own a license, you also can be an operator. So it's a much more tight knit community than we have in California. And so with that, you just have this kind of different feel amongst the community because everyone knows each other. A lot of people
Mm.
in general are kind of on the same page at this point. Legalization or recreational legalization is just over a year old at this point. And so everyone is kind of a similar mindset. Whereas in California, we're a couple years into adult use legalization, and you're really starting to see people form different opinions on what legalization should look like, how the market should operate, how licensing should be. And so you tend to get two different communities or thought processes that are emerging in the state.
Wow, that's really interesting. And you've been going to like a lot of conferences lately. You've just been traveling around. How has that been, just being able to meet so many new people out in the different states?
Yeah, well, I love it. It's something I've done in every job that I've had. I'm a big networker. I love people. I particularly love the cannabis community because like I said, every community is so different. But yeah, I was just at Benzinga in Miami last week, and that was for the Cannabis and Psychedelics Capital Conference. So a lot of investors, a lot of entrepreneurs building retailers and brands. And so it's like with cannabis being so new, it's really important that to build trust and just to really have a personal connection to understand what people's interests are in the industry, what it is that they're building. And there's just no better way to do that than going to events. It's something that I've been doing for the longevity that I've been in cannabis. I started in the industry 4 years ago, and 2 years after being in with Headset, then the pandemic hits, and so a lot of the industry events moved digital, right? A lot of these Zoom meetups,
Right.
and so for me, it's just in what I do at Headset, in what I'm interested in. It's so people driven, and so just networking, being in person with people, it's just generated so much opportunity for us as a company, for me as an individual. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about and kind of look forward to discussing more.
Yeah, and how did you've been networking like a lot in various roles. Like how did you rise up the ranks with this? Like where did you start networking? Because I saw that in one of
Mhm.
your LinkedIn posts you even said you had like trouble with public speaking. Like how did you kind of come out of your shell in that way?
Yeah. Well, okay. So a little bit about my personal story. Um, So right after I grew up in Southern California, I grew up in Irvine, and right after graduating college, I went to Cal State Fullerton. I started working in the app space. The iPhone had just come out a year prior, and I was working with all these app developers in this very new industry. People were just starting to build apps. We were just, as a consumer and individual, just starting to use them in our daily lives. And so I was really pushing, or I was selling some piece of new technology. And the way in any new industry, kind of like what we're doing in cannabis, you have a bunch of different networking events. And so I was this young person just out of school, and I had to get comfortable very quickly being just on my own, going to different industry events and learning to talk to people. And at first, this was such a challenging thing for me to do. I think for a lot of people, it's not easy to just walk up to a stranger or insert yourself into a group of people and start talking and, having like really thoughtful conversation. I think that's a very learned skill for a lot of people. Some people it comes naturally. To me, it didn't initially. It was just something that I had gotten used to. And so what I learned very early on in my career was just that the power of people and the power of like community and networking, especially if you want to sell a particular idea or a piece of technology or whatever it may be. So in that role, I started traveling around the country, and every job that I've had has essentially been the same type of role, where I'm just traveling around. I'm going to different events. I'm meeting the community. I'm taking all of that information and those insights and those contacts, and then kind of filtering it up to the business and different departments, and really making all of those insights actionable. And so, yeah, I've just been doing it for so long. So, anyway, so after a few years, then I started realizing, okay, now I have this this network, this community. I'm going to start speaking and start kind of translating what it is that the companies that I'm working for, what our product is. And because I've always worked for a very heavy tech solution, it was really complicated to explain. And so I would try to explain these complex pieces of technology to the masses. And at first, that was really, really hard to do. I mean, I would get up on stage and my hands would be shaking. I would just be so nervous, and I was terrible at it at first. And it wasn't until years later that it started to click, and I started to realize if you really know the content, and if you are comfortable with yourself, which takes a long time, that took a long time for me, then I can get up and do anything. But the key is really knowing the content, practicing if you don't know the content, and it's storytelling. It's really figuring out how to storytell. And it's always surprising to me when I go to conferences and see so many people get up on stage, and they don't really kind of take that mindset into
Mm.
taking people's time when you're, translating some message or communicating what it is that you care about. And I just think the storytelling component of it is so important. So I've just learned things along the many years of doing a lot of different public speaking gigs, how important that is. So now I'm much less nervous. So today, I was speaking at the Arizona Dispensary Association meeting, and that was probably one of the hardest public speaking presentations I've given, because there was a lot of questions around the data that I was presenting.
Mm.
And so learning to kind of react on the fly, remain confident, it's just a learned skill that happens over time.
That's really cool. I love like your whole story. It really is like a muscle, that you have to grow and keep working at, because I know for a long time I was stressing with my ums and my uhs during a lot of conversations, and I
Mhm.
try hard to make sure I don't do that. But that's, I feel like, is like on my baby level a little bit. But no, I think networking is super important, and it's a great skill to have, especially in this industry, because there's so many intellectual people in cannabis just like waiting to be connected. You know what I mean? So many people have so many skills, and it's wonderful to be the person that can really make those kind of opportunities happen for people. What kind of drew you to the cannabis industry?
Well, personally, I've been a consumer for 15 years. I've been a cannabis enthusiast. I first, I'm a flower lover, and I had my first puff when I was like 15 years old. And it wasn't until probably halfway through college to which I really started to develop more of an interest in cannabis, and started to realize that, you could use it for different, let's say, spiritual or medicinal reasons. So it kind of was always with me. I always had an interest in it. My family consumes cannabis, so it was never something that I looked at as not something that I shouldn't be doing. Um, but my in probably like 8 years ago, my interest started to kind of develop with it. And quite frankly, I was using cannabis to check out. I was
Mm.
at a place in my life where I think I was just going through the motions of life. I wasn't really sure of who I was and what I wanted to be doing. And meanwhile, all these great things were happening in my life. Everything seemed to be kind of fitting into place and developing, but I just wasn't it just didn't feel like me. I was kind of lost as a
Mm.
person. And so what happened is like 5 years ago, I just inherently started to feel this sense of like, okay, something needs to change in my life because something is not connecting for me. And at that time, I had been, like I said, I'm a flower lover. So I'd been smoking really heavy indicas. I was using cannabis to check out. And what ended up happening through a series of different life events that we don't have enough time to go into on this podcast, but through a series of different life events, I'll say I started to wake up and I started to realize that I needed to make some changes in my life. And so
Mm.
I had been working in ad tech and gone on this crazy career journey for like 8 to 10 years. And a colleague of mine who knew that I was really into cannabis was like, hey, my neighbor is Cy Scott, one of the founders of Leafly. And because I came
Wow.
from the app world, because I loved Leafly, it was like such a great way to just understand cannabis. And I was like a huge fangirl. So I was like, no way. And so he introduces us and we met up in San Francisco. Cy told me what he was working on with Headset. And I was ready to make a transition in my life and kind of try something new because I will say my career in ad tech and working with mobile app developers the year the iPhone came out, it was incredible to be a part of that. I was part of a new
I'm
year
sure.
one of a new industry, a wild west of an industry. I love startup life. I love instability. So it was always kind of confusing for me that despite like having all these interesting things that I do love happening, I still could feel so lost as a human
Mm.
being. But anyway, so Cy told me what he was working on. And meanwhile, this was the time when I was waking up and I'm like, okay, I need to make some transition in my life. So I decided to leave ad tech, leave my job, and take 4 months off to go find myself. And in this four
Mm.
months, I did a lot of different things. I learned to sail on the San Francisco Bay. I learned to play guitar and the drums and sing. I took pottery courses. I took a 6-week cooking course. I just did all these things to go find myself. And what started to happen is that as I was like going on this self journey, my relationship with cannabis started to change. Instead of
Mm.
using it to check out and consuming these really heavy indicas, I started to use cannabis to come into consciousness. I started
Mm.
to use it to really understand who I am. It became part of playing music. It became part of this creative connection for me. And so that's kind of been the journey that I've been on for the last 4 years since I then joined the cannabis industry. And then also I'm going through this life experience where I'm waking up. It's like now I'm in this place of just manifestation. And it's kind of a part of my journey and why I'm out talking to so many people and so interested in community because. It's like I grew up in Irvine, which is a wonderful place to grow up, but it's a very kind of my childhood or just growing up was a rather sheltered experience. And then
Mm.
I lived in LA. I moved to San Francisco 10 years ago to be in this tech journey. And everyone around me, it was still sort of a similar mindset. I didn't have a whole lot of diversity in people around me. And then I joined the
Okay.
cannabis industry and I'm working with people from all different backgrounds, all different mentalities, all different walks of life. So you couple that with like doing something you're really passionate about, something, this like my own spiritual awakening, and now meeting all sorts of people. It's just been this like convergence of different life experiences that is kind of contributing to where I'm at right now and why I'm so passionate about the things that I'm passionate about.
Wow, I'm so glad that you had that really good positive pivot in your life and that you were able to switch your use around and make it positive. And you touched on manifestation as well. I wanted to ask you about that because I saw that in one of your posts. And I also believe in manifestation as well, manifesting your best life. How would you say you go about manifesting your best life? Like, what is manifestation to you?
Manifestation to me, okay, so like as I was just describing, kind of not being aware of myself or feeling like I was going through the motions of life, what that really means to me or how I would describe that is it's kind of a lack of consciousness. It's a word I would use is I was asleep. I was asleep to who I was. I was asleep to the world around me. So to me, what manifestation means and what I actively try to do is it's being present. And I know this can sound like a big, broad word, but it's really like engaging with people and looking at people and listening, not having your mind wandering somewhere else, but truly being present in every single moment. And because I felt like I was I don't want to be hyperbolous, but dead inside, for for lack of a better word. I now feel constantly that just like the idea of death is always around, just meaning that
Mm.
like how important it is to be alive, to be present, and we just don't know when our life can come to an end. So I just constantly have this feeling in me. And so that's why like what manifestation means, anyone can, whatever we think good or bad, that's what manifestation is. So the more that we're present, the more that we're here and we're showing up for ourselves, we're understanding who we are, we're understanding who other people are, we're having very like thoughtful conversations and the way we go about our life. I think people find, and I'm finding this, that whatever we think ends up manifesting. And it might not be when you think it's going to be, but it always ends up manifesting. So it's just like the more present we are, the more you're going to have the life that you want to have.
Yeah, for me, I totally agree. And for me, it's like knowing that what I want to go for is possible, and you can be patient for it. It's not necessarily that just because you want it and just because do everything you can, it's gonna happen tomorrow. But it is just the journey, and you have to be present for every moment because those are all a part of like the big picture, the big, you know what I mean, at the end of the day. Because if we're focused so much on these destinations, these like, oh, we solve the goal, then you're really gonna look back and be like, well, what's the next goal, and not really focused on
Yes.
like, wow, how did we get here? We need to be like proud of ourselves, and we need to like be present in just like understanding how, yeah, how what's the word for it? How temporary sometimes life can be
Hmm.
at times too. I totally see that. I wanted to
Yes, exactly.
ask, like, what keeps you going? Because when I look at your LinkedIn and I like look at your pages, I see someone that is just like completely on the ball, like, you know what I mean, going, 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 is just like super passionate, super inspired. Like, what keeps that fire like going for you now?
Yeah. I think it's kind of what I'm referring to. It's that I'm aware of, and again, I don't want this to sound morbid, but I'm just aware that nothing is guaranteed to us. I'm very conscious that that all we have is this moment. So sometimes I will get anxiety and I'll get overwhelmed because yeah, I'm on the go a lot. I have a lot going on in my life. I have very few moments of downtime, and those moments that I do have, I like to be like in nature or playing music or doing something creative to reconnect back into my source. But it can be hard because I'm always on the go, and as you have so much happening around you, it can be hard to find those moments to kind of connect back into yourself. But I think what it is that inspires me or that keeps me going, it's just that I lived 30 years of my life where I was asleep, where I was not really present. I wasn't really living. And for me, that just became a very painful place to be. And so it still feels new, even though this has been 6 years that I've been kind of like quote unquote awake. It has not left me. And so because the more that I'm here, the more that I become a creative person, which was something that was always so important to me, and I could never really like put my finger on how important that was. I always wanted to, like, growing up, I always wanted to be a creative person. I come from a family of musicians. Like both my parents play music. They're incredibly talented. They're both extreme creatives. And I always felt this like almost like a jealousy that I didn't feel like I had that. But it was more so because I'd never actually explored it in myself. Like, I'll give an
Hmm.
example because my dad plays guitar and he's an incredible musician. And so I grew up around guitars, but I'd never picked one up ever. I never even attempted playing because I had it in my mind that there's no way you didn't start doing this when you were young. There's no way you're going to be able to
Hmm.
play a guitar. This isn't this the that it's just not in you. It's not natural to you. Well, that 4 months that I mentioned that I took off before joining the cannabis industry, I was like, fuck it, I'm buying a guitar and I'm going to learn to play. So I bought a beautiful little baby Taylor. I started taking a weekly lesson at Guitar Center. And I kid you not, within a matter of weeks, I was playing. I had no idea that I could sing. I was like, I'm going to learn the drums because I really like rhythm guitar. So then I start taking a weekly drum lesson. And before I knew it, it was this lesson of like anyone can learn anything they want to learn. It just takes understanding how to learn. So like you have to have a framework of how to learn, I believe. So the lessons was incredibly important because it taught me, okay, this is how I'm going to acquire information. And then it's simply spending the time to do it. And so that experience opened up my whole world because then I realized I wasn't limited in anything that I wanted to learn. And that's honestly been a big part of why I'm doing so many things because I don't live within limitations anymore. I don't live within any idea that there's something I can't do. Now I'm in a mindset of like, oh, wait, I can do anything I want to do. So I just got to pick the things I want to do and spend the time doing it. And that's it.
Yeah, I totally believe the same thing, and that's why, like, when it comes to money and, thinking about what you want to do for the rest of your life, it's so much. It's an interesting thing to go through, you know what I mean, life and understanding and thinking like you want to go do one thing and then completely switching around and doing another and having that journey of
Mhm.
like refiguring out like what you want to do and how you're going to do it. And it is scary at times because, there's no blueprint anymore. You have to whole scratch the plan and like create a new one. But I think there's something incredibly powerful in that journey, which is like, you know what I mean, you have to retool your brain. And some people,
Mhm.
you know what I mean, can be very adverse to like changing and learning something new and totally just accept that, well, I've put a lot of time into it, you know what I mean, might as well keep going. But that can
Yeah.
be a damaging mindset at times if it's holding you back from doing the things that you really want to do. So
Oh,
that's really
absolutely.
cool. That's awesome that you're on that path of like discovery and that you're like propelled. That's really really
Mhm.
cool. I wanted to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your role at Headset. Like what goes into you being a director?
Mhm. Okay, so well, let me first explain what Headset does in a simple way, and then I'll kind of explain why it is that I'm out doing what I'm doing.
Sure.
So Headset is a cannabis data and analytics company, and we were started by the founders of Leafly 8 years ago. And so, as I mentioned, like just I was a huge fangirl of them at that point. And so, what Headset does is we're a software company. So we have a technology for dispensaries to help them understand all of their point of sale data, and then what we do is we aggregate all of that point of sale data in real time, and then we forecast it up for the entire market so that operators have some understanding of everything that's being sold through in legal dispensaries so that they can figure out kind of what products they want to make, who the consumers of those products are, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like a Nielsen or an IRI in traditional CPG retail industries, but for cannabis. And so I've been with the company for 4 years. And originally, when I was hired, it was with the mindset of we needed to launch more markets. So I'm based in California. California was a focus. So we wanted to get what launching a market means is we have to have enough retailers using the platform and sharing their data with us so that we can then have a large enough pool of data to forecast it up for the entire state. So
Okay.
I was tasked with getting more retailers signing on to use our platform and then expanding into other states across the country. Well, 4 years ago, this was a really hard thing to do because at that point, people had a lot of data hesitancy. They didn't really want to
Hmm.
share their data, and it's understandable because we're just coming out of an illegal industry where people were not tracking any of their data. And
Right.
if they were just tracking it on pen and paper. So here I was going out to all these conferences and speaking at events, and I'm saying, hey, everyone, like we've got this incredible analytics platform that's going to help you understand all your data. And people were like, wait, what? No, we don't want to share our data with you. Like, I have no
Mm.
idea what this is. Like, people aren't generally from analytics backgrounds in the cannabis industry. So there weren't a lot of all people in those roles. So it was a really hard thing to go launch a market when we were having to build the market from scratch. And so what I decided was, okay, we need to build trust. We need to help people understand that this tool is very valuable. It's going to help them. If they can spend a little time learning it, then they're going to reap the benefits of it. It's going to help their business so much. It's going to help their day to day so much. So that took a good like year, 2 years of going to every single event, speaking at every single event, really showing up for the community and explaining very simply put what it is that we do and just providing complete transparency. So what I learned in that like initial year of getting California launched and then before moving into other states and getting those markets turned on was it was just incredibly important to build trust however I could. And so part of my strategy and what I did was I went and formed relationships with every association in every state. So, you mentioned I'm on the board of directors for the California Cannabis Industry Association. That the CCIA was a huge partner for us in kind of giving us an opportunity to go out and talk to all these operators in California and help them understand what it is that we're doing and why we believe the industry needs some form of analytics, why we need to all be on the same page of what's being sold through and how consumer trends are changing. So I took that strategy and then implemented that in every other market, that we're in, which again is why I'm here in Arizona today. And so I just kind of utilized every channel that had some voice within the market. And I went and built strategic relationships with those partners. And I just created unique content. That's why I started sharing a lot of content on LinkedIn, was because I was like, okay, this is super interesting what we're learning at Headset. I know how impactful this is for people's businesses. This industry is moving so quickly. And especially through the pandemic, it's like when the pandemic hit, people started purchasing in entirely different ways. There was a lot of changes that we saw in our industry. And so I just tried to relay as much of that information through whatever channel I could, because I just believe it's helping people to have that understanding and have that knowledge. And so that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. My time is spent in a lot of different forums that allow us what I call a one-to-many strategy. So instead of having a lot of one-to-one conversations, I think about how can I reach as many people as possible and really amplify what it is that we do at Headset and share as much valuable information with people as possible. And it's been resulting in an incredible amount of business for our company. It's bringing in different types of strategic partnerships. It's certainly one of our largest sales channels. So there's been a lot of impact from building trust in the community and just really being an educator more than anything.
That's awesome. And what kind of aspects of the cannabis supply chain can be improved with the data that you guys are gaining, or
So,
that cannabis can the cannabis businesses are gaining for their companies?
yeah. Okay, so on the retail side, so there's really two parts of the industry that we're primarily servicing. There's the dispensaries. So the dispensaries, they really need to understand what is happening within their four walls. So they need to understand what types of products do people purchase. They need to understand the sell-through rates of that product. So they need to be looking at their inventory and saying, okay, I see this product is about to be out of stock. This is clearly a high-selling product. I see it's about to be out of stock, but how much of that product should I reorder? You can use data to do that, right? There wasn't a great way to do this when people were just kind of tracking their inventory via pen and paper a few short years ago. And
Right.
so what we're doing is when we're pulling in all their point of sale data, we're analyzing that for them. And then we're telling them things like, okay, this SKU is about to be out of stock in 14 days. We recommend you reorder X amount of that particular SKU to be in stock for the next X amount of days. So we're helping all the dispensaries make these really data-derived decisions that are helping them manage their inventory. It's helping them with demand planning. Through the pandemic in particular, we hear about a lot of supply chain issues across every industry, right?
For
And a
sure.
lot of the challenge, like especially through the pandemic, people were panic buying a lot of different things, right? People were panic buying toilet paper, they were panic buying sourdough bread, and of course cannabis. And so if retailers aren't basing kind of what they purchase and how much they should purchase based off data, then they're just kind of making blind decisions. And so what we're helping them with is really having that visibility and those insights into how much of those products they should be purchasing, because in cannabis retail, you have a lot of capital that you don't want tied up in your back room, right? You want those products moving. These products expire, so you want to make sure you're ordering the right amount of them. So that's one way that the data is helping them. It's also helping them understand who their customers are. There's what we find is that a lot of dispensaries, it's like their top 10% of customers are making up a significant portion of their revenue. So, who are those customers? What do they like to purchase? How can you send them more targeted promotions? How can you help make sure that they're getting the best possible service? So, using data and seeing what those customers like to purchase, who they are, just gives that dispensary greater visibility. I see some dispensaries when they have access to that information, they'll do things like they can see who their top, 10 customers are, and they'll personally call them instead of just sending a text message. And they'll say, hey, thank you for being, one of our top customers at the store. We want to invite you in. We're going to give you a special tour. We have this new brand that's launching here before anyone else. Like, come in and we'll give you extra discounts or whatever it may be. I think a lot of dispensaries are looking for opportunities to create a more authentic, powerful relationship with their customers to keep them engaged. And so you can use all of your own data to be able to do that. And so those are types of examples of what we're doing on the retail side. And then on the brand side, or an operator side, with our market data platform. So this is, all the real time data, all SKU level data of everything that's being sold through in legal dispensaries. Operators are using that data, and they're tracking the market, and they're saying, okay, I want to create a vape pen. So what does the vape market look like? Okay, I see the vape market makes up 25% of sales in California. Here's the top brands that I'm going to be competing with. Here's how much market share they have. Here's where I might be able to compete as a brand. Here's the price points that maybe I should be looking at. Over the past couple years, we're seeing this emergence of like good, better, best pricing. So we're
Mm,
seeing brands choose to be either a value brand or a mid price point brand or that luxury brand. But you have to have the insight into who all of those brands are and what they're pricing their products at to be able to make those strategic decisions. And until we had some form of data to be able to show the market what's happening in real time, people were just kind of making whatever they wanted to make based off gut instinct. And so
right.
we're out there trying to say, hey, we're here, you can use data to do this.
So, would you also consult businesses on like their next steps? Is that what you're saying as like the operator position? Like as a that's really cool. And it's
Hmm.
interesting because you get to use the data from like all that you've collected without it. Obviously, it's like nameless data, but essentially it is giving a good idea of like sectors and allowing, you to help not only the businesses that are using the software, but also using that data to help other businesses in another way. That's very
Yep.
smart. I love that business idea. Where do you
Yeah.
see the cannabis industry in 5 years? I know we're getting close to regulation, in a lot of different states here and there, but where do you see it in five?
I mean, I'd assume that we're close, if not federally legal at that point. Um, I think we're gonna see a lot more product evolution. Often when I'm talking about the industry, I'm talking about the recreational side. So I want to kind of keep that in mind here. But in 5 years, I think we're going to see a lot more advancement in cannabis being used in a variety of different ways. So the incredible thing about cannabis and why I'm so passionate about it is because the plant has actually 30,000 different use cases. You can use every single aspect of the plant. And so oftentimes our industry, we talk a lot about the recreational side and consumers using it in social ways. But we're just touching, like scratching the surface of the medicinal side of cannabis, using cannabis for material goods. It is such a durable material resource for us, hemp. So I think we're going to start to see cannabis being used in a lot more material goods and building materials, cars, in every type of material good, you name it, it's going to start being used and much more commonplace. I think we're going to have a lot more medical advancement and understanding more research of how cannabis can be helpful for many different illnesses and diseases. Again, we're just scratching the surface. I think we're going to start to have a lot more understanding of terpenes, the different compounds. Right now on the recreational side, as an industry, there's really, the two main compounds that consumers are aware of, THC and CBD. But now people are starting to use a lot more compounds. THCV, for example, they're finding that it's potentially linked to an appetite suppressant. So we could be
Mm,
using this potentially for weight loss. And then all the terpenes, there's just so much that we don't yet know at scale that people are starting to uncover. And so in 5 years, I think we're going to have a lot more variation of products that are using these different compounds and then clearly communicating that to the consumer. So I think we'll still have the same kind of categories that we have, right? beverages, capsules, concentrates, edibles, flour, etc. But I just think we're going to see a lot more innovation in what's in these products. Um, and, I think that's also going to be a lot of this is dependent on regulations and kind of how policy rolls out. Because obviously the FDA will get involved at that point. So I don't know really what cannabis will look like in kind of the regulated market. But what I would say is in 5 years, it's going to be a lot more normalized. People are going to be using it in many different aspects of their lives. And we're going to have a lot more research that's kind of proving out what so many cannabis activists have been saying for so many years, which is just the powerful benefits of the plant from both these medicinal and spiritual or recreational kind of uses.
And it is so wonderful how multi-faced like cannabis can be. There is it almost is like a miracle, plant. I mean it is a miracle plant
Mm-hmm.
for so many people. It's amazing to be involved in this industry too, so young, and I could see why you're a part of it because you also like the startup kind of aspect of it, and getting on the ground floor can be really rewarding to see it like grow. What have you noticed in terms of like seeing women in cannabis? What do you feel about the criticism that it's a boys' club?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It definitely, well, for me, I've always worked in male dominated industries. When I was working in tech, I was pretty much the only woman that was in the room at meetings, and that's often the case in cannabis as well. What do I feel about it? I guess I guess I feel that it's I think that anyone can join this industry. I think there is opportunity for anyone. I think you do as a woman. I wouldn't say that I ever feel that my male counterparts are not including me at the table or not respecting my voice. I personally have not had too many of those experiences, and I'm not dismissing that they happen because I know they happen and I have had them happen. But I don't think that men have to think as much about the same things I have to think about. So, for example, because I go to a lot of events, I and I'm interacting with so many men, I'm conscious of and thoughtful of everything that I'm physically doing. So I'm conscious of how close I get to someone. I'm conscious of how late I stay out at an event. I'm conscious of how I'm communicating. I have to be thoughtful in ways that I don't think men necessarily fully understand or appreciate. I think for me as a person, because I'm just kind of a strong willed, I have 5 brothers. So for
Hmm.
me, it's just like this is normal for me. So I've never felt kind of like out of place or that I don't have a right to be at the table. I certainly experience things where I don't feel that I'm being appreciated for my skill set or for what I bring to the table as much as I would like to be. But I don't know. I just don't let it affect me. And I'm not saying that other women do because it absolutely affects women. It affects everyone. I don't have enough. I don't know. I just don't kind of, I don't notice when anyone is kind of I don't take other people's whatever their story they're in. I try very hard not to allow myself to be in that story. You know what I mean? I try not to take other things personal from an experience that I have. I recognize if something happens to me that maybe I don't like, or that I'm not sure why someone maybe talked to me that way, or are they dismissing me? I just don't personalize anything like that because I recognize that everyone is in their own story and their own kind of experience that they've had in life. And so my general disposition towards this question or how I feel about being in a male dominated industry, I just try not to think about that. And maybe it's not like maybe I could be doing more to be aware of that and but I think my perspective on it and what my approach to it is going to be the most impactful in the long run because I'm just not letting it affect me. I'm just doing me. I'm moving forward. I'm doing what I feel is right and I'm living my authentic self and what I believe and I just don't let any of that kind of affect my day to day. Does that make sense?
No, that totally makes sense. You conduct yourself to like a certain standard when you're out and about, and you want to make sure that you come off as professional and everybody understands like the boundary by like how you're coming off as well. And when it comes to other people, like even if they may do something where your mind kind of like thinks, you're just like kind of like letting it go because, we all kind of like, we have our own ways about going about things, and sometimes maybe it's their southern charm or something where they come from, you know what I mean? So it's just
Exactly.
like reading the room and stuff like that, and understanding like, who's being a threat and who's just like not understanding, like, you know what I mean, the vibe or something like that.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I totally see that. When it comes to like any kind of confrontation, or like say you didn't feel respected in your job, like are you the type of person to confront it and make it like known, make
Yes.
sure it's like dealt with?
Yes, absolutely. Every time. And that's kind of what I'm like my learning of waking up to myself and who I am. It's also I learned to stand up for myself. And that's an incredibly powerful thing. And I think that's in part why I don't feel that like I don't feel as much of that I'm suppressed or anything like that, because I just that's not how I go through my day. If something happens, then I try to ask people like, "Hey, did you mean this to come across this way? That's how I'm taking this." Like that's something I'm
Right,
actively trying to do instead of making assumptions about people, because I want to communicate what I'm feeling, and
for
I want to
sure.
communicate it in a way that someone is going to understand how that made me feel. But I also, at the same time, don't want to make an assumption for what their intent was. And
Right,
just because I think people are good. It's like people ultimately are good. Of course, there are people that are bad actors and have negative intent, but I actually think it's far less than it really is. I think that
right,
often people are in their own story where they're making assumption. But if you just ask, like, "Hey, did you mean for you to make me feel small? Because I really felt small when you said it to me this way."
right.
It will do that, then I think most of the time you're gonna find that people are like, "Oh my god, no, I had no idea, I didn't realize that."
Yeah,
And then you start to realize, like, look, everyone is in their own world, everyone's dealing with their own set of circumstances. It doesn't matter if you're a man, woman, black, white, Asian, it doesn't matter. It's everyone is in there has their own unique life experience, and we are just so quick to judge other people and to make an assumption about other people's lives when we often have no idea. And I'll give you one more example from Benzinga last week. So I've seen on LinkedIn a lot of people, in our industry, we have like roots and we've got suits. And you see it oftentimes a lot of people making an assumption about, all these white corporate men that are running these cannabis companies, or these OG cannabis people that don't know how to run a business. And I don't know how many of those people, I'm just curious if to the people that are making those assumptions, do they actually know any of those people? Because I'm friends with people from all walks and aspects of the cannabis industry. I have so many friends that are on the traditional side of the industry still. I have a lot of friends that are on the corporate side. And just my personal experience is that everyone is equally passionate about this plant, but for different reasons. Some are passionate
right,
because of an economic benefit, some are passionate because of a medicinal benefit. To me, it just doesn't really matter what someone cares about. What matters to me is that they're doing it consciously, that they're saying, "Yeah, I'm a part of this because this is what I believe and this is what I want." And so, oftentimes, like with Benzinga, I saw a lot of kind of negative feedback from the community where some people were like, "Oh, Benzinga is just this corporate, all these white men that are taking over the industry." And I don't know, just from what I heard and sitting in the sessions, the people I interacted with, listen, these were people that were like, "I care about the medicinal benefits of cannabis and I want to help bring that, like it's already going mainstream. It's a legitimate industry right now. We can't stop it. So we have to just do the best that we can, and everyone consciously build companies." And that's what I experienced at Benzinga. So I see a lot of people from other communities that are negatively talking about the suits, for example. And I just am curious, and I just wonder how many of those people actually know those people, or are they making an assumption, and vice versa. And I
right.
think that the more that people get to know each other, they're going to see that, like, people are good ultimately. And there's very few people that are actually coming in with negative intent. That's just my experience. And I know a lot of people, so I'm confident in kind of my beliefs in this.
Yeah, and what would you say, because you come from like a background of like I also wanted to ask you this too. With I saw that you raised money for the cannabis industry too. How did you go about that? Because I know it's like it's hard to get loans and stuff like that. So how did you go
Mhm.
about that?
Well, at Headset, Cy Scott, our CEO and one of our co-founders, has been responsible for raising all of the funding. I've had my own company before, an app in tech, where I raised money, and that was a completely different time period because
Mm.
money was very easy to come by. When I raised money for this for an app that I had, it was a time where investors were just trying to get into any good idea of an app they could. There was a lot of capital available. That is not like that in cannabis. Now it's really hard to raise capital. But I think for Cy, and I don't kind of want to speak like on behalf of him, but I think it's not that it's certainly been a challenge to raise capital at the terms and the valuation that the company wants. But I think ultimately, if you have a sound business model and team, and investors recognize this is a long game, this is not an easy industry to be a part of. But if you have those pieces where it's a really solid product and a solid team and vision, then I think there are investors that are more than willing to invest. And we're starting to see more traditional investors. One of our latest round, we had a more traditional non-cannabis investor invest in us because they see the long-term potential. But I think now, the industry and investors are recognizing how hard, especially through the pandemic, uh, building a cannabis company is.
Would you say capital is one of the biggest challenges, or what would you say is like one of the biggest challenges of cannabis?
I think, okay, in my experience, I think it's a couple things. Capital is certainly one of the biggest challenges because you always end up needing more money than you think. But I think it's also a combination of regulation. Every state, or Canadian province has different rules and regulations, and then you start to kind of see that play out into the market. So I'll give an example. So in California, there's about 850-ish open and operating stores, and this is a state of 40 million people. And two-thirds of California doesn't actually allow cannabis retail. So you've got two-thirds of the state that's actually a dry county. And when people are using this for medicine, they obviously need access to cannabis. So what's happened is that we have a very large traditional market in California. And so that can be very hard for legal businesses, particularly for brands, because what's happened is there's so many more brands than there are dispensaries that you're selling into a very small marketplace when it's a very saturated brand marketplace. So to get shelf space, that and mind share from a bud tender, and to remain top of mind, this is a really, really hard thing to do. So a lot of operators in California would certainly say capital is one of the biggest challenges, but I think it's also the dynamics of how regulations have been rolled out, meaning very limited retail access and also very high taxes. And so like at CCIA, some of the things that we're kind of pushing for from the association is really, elimination of the cultivation tax. It's opening up more access to retail throughout the state of California, and then it's broader tax reform. And it's all in the spirit or the idea that if we decrease taxes for the consumer, then the consumer is going to be more incentivized to purchase cannabis from a legal store, which ultimately we believe is better for the consumer because these are tested products. When people are
Right.
using this for medicine, you want to make sure that these products are tested. And obviously, as we saw a couple years ago with the vape crisis or vapey, there was a lot of untested products, in vape cartridges in
Right.
particular, and people were getting very sick from that. And so, in order to kind of help combat, I guess, the traditional market. And I'm cognizant of, and I don't ever want this to come across as like not being respectful of the traditional market. These are people that have paved the way for where we are in cannabis. We need to bring them into the legal market. We need to make licensing easier for them. We need to make it
Right.
cheaper. We need to make sure that our craft cultivators, all of these retail stores that have been operating and servicing medical patients, are brought into the legal market, that they're not shut out of it. And I think that's where a lot of people, get very passionate about this industry because there's so many people that are saying, hey, look, these people have been paving the way. And now we're having people with a lot of capital that can come in and they get to kind of play in the game, but these people
Right.
don't. So
Yeah.
how do we do that, you know?
Yeah, and that's why I love talking to people about like social equity and seeing like, you know what I mean? Because even in Florida, like I'm from Florida, we only have 10 licenses or something like that allowed in the state. So it's like very easy for a monopoly to happen on the prices here, and you know what I mean? No, like small people getting into the industry, and then it's like, then you know the price of the license is so high because there's only 10. So there really does need to be more done in regulation for getting people licenses so they can be a part of this business, because we do have passionate people out there that have the business sense, that have been into it, even from the perspective of even been incarcerated. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people out there that have skills in this and that have put their life on the line, put their freedom on the line for this plant. And so I totally agree that there needs to be more like availability. It's so interesting
Mhm.
that there is such a barrier to entry, you know what I mean, for cannabis when
Mhm.
you look at like other industries, and usually the barrier has more to do with, you know, the saturation of the industry rather than, you know what I mean, so many people interested in it and they literally can't get in because of, you know, government saying like only 10.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it, re- it really is an interesting
Yeah.
scenario. How do you
I
feel
mean,
about Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
well, I'm overall, I'm really hopeful, and I feel like people should kind of recognize that, like, even though things aren't maybe rolling out the way I think that a lot of industry activists would hope, at least there's conversation that's being generated, like
For sure.
conversation around social justice, around policy reform. Cannabis is creating that conversation right now, and it's gonna lead to change at some point, but this is a really long game because it takes we're destigmatizing, you know, 10 like so many years of people having one particular viewpoint of cannabis. It's going to take a long time, or just social justice. Like, we're in the midst of an awakening right now, and before an awakening it gets really hard. And so even though there's all these negative things happening, and it's so hard for certain groups of people over others, I'm very positive and hopeful that this is like, people are waking up. And I'm much more positive on it because we haven't had these conversations in our society as much as we're having right now over these past few years.
No, for sure. There's definitely been a change in like what we've been able to talk about, like between, you know, conversations in terms of like politics, religion, and I don't know if it's just like, you know, my perspective, my bubble, but there has been a lot more conversations on even like financial stuff, like talking to people about, you know, how much do you make, and like trying to kind of make it make sense for you and understanding your worth. And like these conversations are important, you know what I mean? Because not everybody gets to have them, you know what I mean, in their social circles or see them. So the more that we can talk about it, the more that it comes up, and the more people that can benefit from cannabis by learning about the benefits. Because, you know, if they just think, oh well, you know, I've smoked cannabis and I'm stupid, you know, and that's the only thought they've ever had about it, and they've never challenged it, it there's ways that it could definitely help more people out there that don't have the greatest ideas about it.
Hmm.
When you went from like consuming, you know, 15 years ago to now, like, did you ever believe that this plant would create this opportunity for you like this?
No, every day I wake up, I'm so grateful. And I'm always pinching myself, like, I can't believe this is my job and that I get paid for this and that this is where our society is at. Like, no, I would have had no idea growing up if my 15-year-old self that was smoking a bowl in the back of my friend's car had any idea this is what I would be doing for a career. I would not have believed you. But again, it's like times are changing and the world is, I think we're waking up, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of this journey. And that's kind of why I feel like I have a responsibility as like a young white woman to be that a professional woman, to be like, hey, like, look, this is my story, this is how I use it. And that's why I try to be very open about it, because I realize not everyone can do that. And there's a responsibility, I think, in being a voice to be able to do that and destigmatize and help other people feel comfortable coming forward and saying the same thing. And that's why I'm also passionate about saying, like, look, I used cannabis to check out for many years of my life. And I'm concerned about that. I'm very concerned when I look at the data and I see that Gen Z, younger generations, when they're consuming cannabis and they're, choosing form factors that are very high in THC. And I just wonder, are they kind of doing the same thing that I was? And how do we have that conversation? Like, how do we, because I wasn't looking at it like that. I wasn't connecting the dots like, hey, you're not wanting to be here presently, so you're using something to check out. I think as our society as a whole, we need to be having conversations about how do we wake people up to themselves? How do we help people come into more consciousness and use whatever it is you want to use, have whatever experience you want to have, but just be aware of it. Be aware of why you're doing it, especially as we move into a new world with psychedelics, which I'm even
Right.
more passionate about psychedelics than I am
Yeah, I'm
cannabis,
also
because
very excited.
there's even more opportunity. Like, that's when we're going to start to see even more people waking up, because we're just at every point in our lives, from before we're even born and come into this earth, we're just fed so many different messages. You have to do everything in your power to fight against whatever the world is kind of designed to be for you. And so I just think whatever tools are available to us, particularly natural tools, to help us come back in and connect to our source, wake us up to who we are. This sounds like unrealistic or far-fetched to say, but I do believe that we could have peace. We could have some form of world peace, because I think what happens is an individual wakes up, their kind of hate or judgment just dissipates, because you start to realize that, oh my gosh, my brother and sister, you're just like me. You were just lost as I was, and you're just living in your own world, and the judgment starts to dissipate. And so I think if we have these natural tools that connect us back into ourselves, connect us back into the world around us, help us wake up to the beauty of the world, then people aren't as they're just not going to be filled with that, like, the anger to be harmful to someone else. It just doesn't exist. Like, I just don't go through my day at all like that. Like, I used to. That's what I'm saying, is I looked like a completely different person. I felt like a completely different person, because I was not awake to who I was. And so that made me very, like, upset and angry and confused inside. And I think that's how most people are. I know everyone can relate to what I'm saying, because this is the challenge of man. So I think it's like, I don't know. That's why I'm hopeful, because I see cannabis, I see psychedelics, I see then other conversations around social justice. All these things are becoming conversations today where I just don't think they were as much
Yeah.
before. And this is all good. This is all very good.
No, I totally agree. And I think like the internet's to blame, like the proliferation of like, you know, people's opinions where you can totally find, you know what I mean, communities of people where they're going through similar things. Like whether you have a disability, whether you're interested in cannabis, whether, you fit into these types of groups or these types of experiences. Like there's so many people out there that are like ready to relate to you, ready to share their like story, and ready to like kind of all be in this kind of learning journey together. I totally try to be learning from every experience and take it all in and try to be like better the next day. That's kind of like how I go through it. But it's been really awesome talking to you about your journey and just like your career. I think you're an incredibly intelligent person who has so many years of just more success going down the line. For real, I really appreciate talking to you today. It's awesome. It's been awesome.
Oh, thank you. You were an awesome interviewer. I loved this.
Oh, oh, thank you so
Yeah.
much. No, I appreciate it. My last question today would be like, what advice would you give for anybody trying to pursue like a path in data and cannabis?
um the best advice I could give is just put yourself out there, and it's the networking. It's get to know as many people, but like, don't just show up to an event and just kind of like keep in the corner. Like, push yourself and like share your story, and like ask people questions. Truly go in open-heartedly and engage. And what I think most people are going to find is that people are very like this is a community of people that are kind of like, they're outliers, they're pioneers, they're people that are all relating over something relatively similar. And you, I think, find that a lot of people are very willing to help. And so just put yourself out there, do not be afraid, and go to as many, immerse yourself in as many things as you can. Show up to every event that you can, every Zoom meeting that you can, and you will get whatever it is that you want out of it. If you consistently do that, you can be wherever you want to be.
You can
And
take over
so
the world.
yeah, truly. Hmm.
No, I totally agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your time and your advice and your stories. I really appreciate it. This has been Jocelyn Sheltraw. She is wonderful. She's the director of industry relations at Headset, and she's on the board of directors for the CCIA. And she came on our show, and she totally just spent an awesome time with us. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching.